Let's do it. Hey everybody, this is Joy Forrest with Call to Peace Ministries, and today I'm here with a special guest, Dr. Debra Wingfield. And Debra, if you would just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you became such a great advocate. You're a domestic violence advocate, I know, but just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this work.
Okay. Well, Joy, as you know, I have a doctorate in counselor education, and I've been working in this field for over 40 years. I stopped counting at 40. that was sufficient. I've been working with abuse across the lifespan ever since I've been in my professional career. Mm-hmm. And I came to domestic violence towards the end of my doctoral program, and I was introduced to it actually by my husband, who was doing a offender treatment group, and I was starting my doctoral internship, and he asked me if I would sit in the group with him one night because his co-facilitator wasn't there. And I agreed to do that, and when I left that group, I told him that before I ever did another domestic violence offender group, I would have to learn about what makes these guys tick. And I proceeded to do that. I took a lot of continuing education credits. I did a lot of reading and eventually developed my own training courses that were combined at one point into college level courses at Colorado State University, Pueblo, and taught those for several years. And now I have a training company that I do virtual training online using those courses, and training professionals, training mental health professionals, and branching out to train attorneys and professionals that are working on legal cases.
Yeah.
And I came to the area of doing advocacy when I started seeing what was going on in the family court system, and that in most of the cases that I work with, I'm working with mothers who are protective of their children and then having to explain to the court why it's unsafe for the children to be with the father because of his abusiveness, and having the courts basically turn them down and say, no, I don't believe you. I don't understand why you even say this about this individual, because obviously he looks like a fine man. Exactly. He's got a stable job. He makes a good income, and children deserve to have both parents in their lives. And then there's another misconception that goes along with that, and that is, now that you're out of the house and you're no longer together, the abuse must have stopped anyway, so there won't be any problems with that.
Yeah.
And in fact, what I see very, very often is abuse that happens in the court system, and the abusers turn to using the court system as a way to control and manipulate, because now they don't have physical access to their former spouse or former partner.
Yeah, absolutely. I see this all the time. In fact, I was telling you before we turned the recorder on that I just have an unusual number of cases like this going on here recently. And so that's one reason I wanted to interview you. You've recently moved to North Carolina, and you reached out to me, and I'm so grateful that you did. I think I plugged you in right away with one of our ladies. and so I appreciate that. It is such a huge issue. I see women who have had multiple children who, either lost custody or they're having to share custody with somebody who was not only abusive to them, but to their children. And so I wanted to interview you and ask you, let's talk a little bit about that process, because what we talked about beforehand was that it's like a brainwashing, and we wonder, what's happening with these kids. Well, I always tell the ladies, okay, well, how long did you believe what he was telling you? So, I mean, these are children. And so these guys are very good at weaving the story and twisting things and getting you so confused that you think that what he's saying has to be true. So would you talk a little bit about that process?
Well, I can talk from my experience of observing this and what I see abusers do. And I'm going to talk about abusers being fathers just to keep this separate, although sometimes there are mothers who are abusive as well. But primarily, I'm looking at fathers who are abusive. And what I see with them is that they are operating from several motivations. One is that they want to shut up their former spouse, who many people call a victim. I call them survivors because they have survived. Mm-hmm. And my work with them is to help them get to a point of thriving. I believe that they have an opportunity now to turn their own lives around and be thrivers. And so they want to shut them up, and they try to use the court system to do that. And they even manipulate their own attorneys to address what is going on with them, so that it looks like it's all their ex-spouse's problem or their ex-partner's problem, and that their ex-partner is mentally ill. I hear that all the time. Yes. Even when they've had psychic evaluations and those evaluations show that there is no mental illness, they continue to perpetuate that message and perpetuate it with the children. The next tactic that they'll use is they'll use retaliation. They'll retaliate by brainwashing the children. They'll retaliate by failing to communicate with their former spouse or former partner what's going on with the children, so that mothers don't have an opportunity to be involved in some things with their kids that they really want to be involved with. Or they'll say things to people in the community, even though they might have court orders that say they're not supposed to talk about their ex in derogatory terms. They continue to do that. Mm-hmm. And they want to turn the people in the community against their ex. So they use retaliation tactics. And then the third way is revenge. They want to take revenge on their ex because their ex has had the audacity to figure out what they're doing and to leave them. You'll have to excuse me, the gnats have come in the house today.
Oh, I hate that.
And so part of what we want to do is we want to help the survivor actually learn how to communicate effectively without getting caught into the traps that the abuser sets. Yeah. And they use those traps to then take them back to court and try to negotiate with the court to have either less parenting time for the survivor or no parenting time or supervised parenting time. Mm-hmm. So they're constantly working to remove that person from the children's lives, because as in one evaluation that I was just reviewing today, father believes that mother is expendable, that she's no longer needed. She produced the children. She did what he wanted her to do. And now he should have total control of the children. And the children are only family when they're with him. There's no family involved when they're with her. Mm-hmm. So it's not a family relationship between the mother and child.
Wow.
It's just with the father and child.
Yeah.
So I'm going to
hit a few gnats. Go ahead.
Touch this gnat.
Yeah.
Encourage him to go someplace else.
Yeah, well, sort of fits the theme, doesn't it?
Right.
Well, so you talked about what these usually in our case too. What we see is it's women. I know it happens with mothers do it to their children, or with their fathers as well. Our ministry tends to work mostly with women who have been victimized, and I do really think it's more common also with the male perpetrators. But anyhow, let's go back and talk a little bit about what these, what the mothers who have had this happen, how can they help counteract what's happening with their children when the brainwashing starts? Because I have seen it. I mean, I've seen kids who I thought had a beautiful, healthy relationship with their mother start turning against their mother as soon as the separation occurred.
So one of the things that I talk with mothers about is developing resilience skills in their children and how to help their children see the reality from the fiction and separate truth from the fiction that the father is actually creating in the child's mind. And an example of that was something that a mother figured out with my encouragement. I said, okay, how are you going to teach your child the difference between what is truth and what is fiction from dad? And she started working with her on something called actions and words. And this was something mom came up with. I didn't come up with it. Mom came up with it.
Okay.
And so she taught her daughter to look at what are the actions that are going on versus the words she hears. And we know with abusers that one of the things that we look at when we're doing treatment with them is what are their actions? Because are their actions actually congruent, or do they work together with the words that are coming out of their mouths, or are their actions the opposite actually? And as we do that with children, what we're doing is we're teaching them how to think for themselves, how to be critical thinkers about what's going on around them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very stressful situation for children. We know that the effects of even coercive control without physical violence on children has lifetime effects. We know that from the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that was done by Dr. Folletti. And that study has actually pushed forward the whole agenda of the Centers for Disease Control on child abuse prevention as well as violence prevention. So it's had a dramatic shift in the thinking as far as professionals are concerned, who are aware and really using the information out of those studies. One of the things that we find is a lot of the professionals involved in these cases are not aware of those studies. Yeah. And as a result, they are not making good decisions that are in the best interest of these children. What they're doing is they're following court mandates. And in many states, those mandates are that unless you can prove domestic violence, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, children should be 50% with each parent because they have a right to an equal relationship with both parents. And actually, the more recent research is starting to show that that's more detrimental to children mm-hmm. than if they're with one primary parent and one visiting parent. Mm-hmm. But again, we have a pendulum that's moved all the way over to this 50-50 shared parenting, and we're having to push it back slowly because these changes come very slowly mm-hmm. to where judges will actually listen and understand and know that it's best for these children to be with one primary parent. And again, if they're with a primary parent, what we're looking for is a parent who is going to provide not only for their cognitive development, but their social and emotional development. And that's really very important because I've seen children who come out of these situations and they may be great in school, they may be getting phenomenally good grades, but they have no social skills, they have no emotional skills, they're not able to communicate. And the sad part is we see those children then perpetuating the problems that they learned going back to being with an abusive parent.
Yeah. Well, I see how detrimental it is for these kids, and I mean, just devastating for the moms that we deal with, because these are moms who have been primary caregivers, and it's all of a sudden that's been pulled out from under you, and I've seen it where the abusive parent has gotten full custody with the good parent, or the one that I've been working with ended up with just visitation. So I've seen that a few times as well. And, and I think there's a number of reasons. It's because abusive people tend to look so good, like you said earlier.
Right.
I think sometimes our mama bear instincts kick in, and maybe we react a little too strongly. And so that picture that they've painted of us as she's crazy,
Mm-hmm.
it might even look that way a little bit. So what do you think? How does that end up happening? Because I mean, I see it. It's rare, but I've seen it happen that way. Not even 50%, but where the abusive person's actually gotten, primary custody.
Yeah. Well, actually, let me give you some statistics. One of the things that we know is that approximately 7 to 10% of all divorces with children end up in the family courts. They're not settled out of family court. They actually end up in family court. And those are primarily domestic violence custody cases. And if you look at Barry Goldstein's work, you'll find that he shows you a lot about how those are domestic violence custody cases. And of those 7 to 10% of cases that go through a trial and go through all the levels of the family court system, one of the things that we see is about 70% of the abusers actually prevail in getting either primary custody or sole custody of their children.
Wow.
And the numbers that amounts to on an annual basis, and I'm emphasizing annual, is about 58,000 children who end up with the abuser.
Wow.
And if you think about the average age of those children is somewhere around 3 to 5 years of age, and they're with that abusive parent until they're 18, because it's very hard then to shift those cases and turn them around to where they end up with the safe, nurturing parent. So it's a serious problem, and part of it comes from the fact that the judges have been misinformed and are uneducated about what we call coercive controlling violence. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand the dynamics and the tactics of coercive control. They only are looking at, has there been physical violence? If there has been, has the person gone to the emergency room? Have law enforcement been involved? And most of these cases, there's no law enforcement involvement. There's usually not an emergency room. There's not a doctor involved in that, because we are still educating people about what is coercive controlling violence. And we have an excellent book on coercive control written by Evan Stark, and he calls that the entrapment of women. And when you look at the whole development of these relationships, from the time a woman meets a man who's an abuser, who comes across as very charming and convincing, and he's the answer to her prayers, and then turns out to be just the opposite. He's very seductive, and he's very covert in what he does to gain access to her. And I actually call these hostage-taking relationships, because she isn't just enveloped in this relationship and then the abuse starts right away. It's very slow. It's very calculated. And we have been able to show that abusers are actually very much in control of what they're doing. Their efforts are right on target.
Yeah. Well, hold on a sec. I'm gonna fix this. Sorry, my light is all messed up. I was gonna fix it. Anyway, so I totally agree. That's very scary statistics. I guess we don't see it that often because you say only 7 to 10% end up going to trial, and so I guess it would behoove most of these folks to do some kind of mediation and come up with an agreement without having to go through the trial. I mean,
well, it would work, but in my experience, what I've seen is abusers don't mediate.
Yeah.
That mediation fails, and even after trial and adjustment to the court orders, and there's a lot of conflict, especially with court orders that are not real structured and very well laid out. The abusers use that as a way to continue to manipulate their ex-spouse and as a way to continue to manipulate the children. Mm-hmm. So very often they're sent back to mediation. Mediation fails, so it's now cost her for mediation that failed again. Then they have to go back to court anyway, and the judge has to make a determination. So we have consistent patterns of abusers refusing to cooperate and try to work on settlements unless it's something that they actually want. So they'll lay out, I want it this way, and it's their attitude, which has been the attitude through the relationship, is it's my way or the highway. If you don't want what I want, then take me to court. And I talk with women every day about those kinds of attitudes and how that has affected their relationship with their children and how it's impacting their parenting.
Yeah. So, we want to give people hope here. So mm-hmm. it is a grim, it's pretty sad situation. I've seen it a lot. Like I said, most of the ones that we deal with end up with primary or 50-50. I've only seen, I've seen 2 who've lost custody of their children. In fact, one of them, she lost custody of 5 children and only had every other weekend visitation. And at the end of a year, I mean, she said, for her, she worked on herself and she kind of got to the point where she wasn't letting it control her or devastate her. And he saw it wasn't bothering her too much. So one day he just showed up at the house with all 5 kids and gave them back. So that's, so I guess, what we need to do is, we need to talk about how can they survive, and not only survive, but come as close to they can as thriving in a very, very tough situation. So, what is going to be helpful for them when they're facing this kind of thing?
Okay. Well, one of the things that I work towards is empowerment. I believe that if these women are empowered to take back their own power and to stand up to the abuser, and that they'll see that they're not getting anywhere. They're not having that retaliatory effect. They're not seeing that they're being revengeful. They're not shutting her up. What they're doing is they're actually getting her to respond in a different way. And one of the things that I do is I actually help these women communicate effectively and take all the emotional charge out of all of their communications. Mm-hmm. And I do talk about that in my book.
Yeah. We need to talk about your book for sure.
And I will talk about my book in a minute. Yeah. But I do encourage these women to learn how to communicate so that they don't get baited into being blamed for everything, having everything turned around on them. Yeah. And it really requires taking all the emotion out of their communications towards the abuser. Mm-hmm. So we have an agreement. And the agreement is you write whatever you want to write to him in an email to me.
Yeah.
and get that out. Vent as much as possible. And then I'll help you pull out just the facts out of what you're writing to him.
Yes.
And we'll send him those facts. In the meantime, she's been validated for her feelings, and she's been heard, but she's been heard by someone who has compassion and empathy about what she's going through and knows that what she's saying is the truth. And then she doesn't get baited into things that he can then turn around and take it to court and show a judge just how crazy she is in her communications with him.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I've kind of learned to do that instinctively as well, because I see the same thing. And I mean, in fact, I did it, you know, myself as a victim years ago. I remember all of a sudden it seemed like it was my pastor, you know, it's like, why did he just like, he's turned against me. As I'm thinking about it, and I've been working with these women, I realized that I got so upset with something that my abuser, with my ex-husband, was saying in his, you know, we came in for a counseling session, which was a huge no-no. And we had just separated, and it turned out very badly. And, you know, and my husband at the time said, you know, you don't care about me. You just want to impress him. And I was just like, you know, so wanting my marriage to work and to get things straight. I cursed in front of the pastor. I just lost it, you know. Here I had been, you know, this faithful church member and all, and he kind of like was real weird towards me afterwards. It didn't even dawn on me at the time. I'm sure that he thought that what went on in the home was like that interaction, you know, where I was losing it, and that it was equal on both of our sides, that we were both abusive. And truly, I mean, it took a lot of pressing to get me to that point. I was just like, no, you don't understand. I mean, you know, because you can't have an argument with these narcissist kind of guys where they will ever listen to reason or logic. And so at some points, all of us blow a little, you know, I think that we all mess up at times, but in general, I was not, you know, I was basically tiptoeing around to avoid conflict. I was definitely not causing it, but that's what I think the judges see. And it's that terrible lack of training. It just bothers me so much. And you mentioned the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. I mean, when you listen to that study and what they found and the effects of living with trauma on children, and this is something I've seen as an advocate for years, I don't understand, like, how can we be so uneducated as a society?
Well, it is. It's mind-boggling. And everything, when we're working with domestic violence and coercive control, is counterintuitive. And the first thing that I find from every woman that I talk to is, I didn't realize that was abuse until I got out of it and somebody showed me, like, the power and control wheel, or started to describe the different types of abuse. And the mistake that I see women make in court is they then say to a judge, well, he emotionally abused me, because she's finally learned that label. And what judges do is they run that through their filter, and they don't hear the same thing that she's saying. So we are learning to say, don't use the labels, describe the behaviors, use the words that he uses. And when you're in court, you can even use that in your testimony and say, Your Honor, I apologize for what I'm about to say, but this is what he said to me, and I don't want to water it down. So, you know, she uses the curse words in court, but with the permission of the judge. And of course, the judges today are not immune from hearing those words, so they're not going to be offended as much as we think they will be. And it's better to do that. So we want to do that. The other thing that we have to do is we have to help her to put the story in context. So you don't want to just say, well, we had this incident here. We want to look at what happened 24 hours, 48 hours before that incident, what maybe happened the week before, to paint the picture that this is something that it was building up to this. And then we want to talk about, what did she think his intent would be when he said those words, when he pinned her against the wall, when he punched the wall next to her head? What did she think his intent was? What did she think his intent was when he held her up against the filing cabinet? I'm using an actual example. And demanded that she say, "I love you," to him in the right tone of voice. And until she did, he didn't let her go. And so what did she think his intent was? And then what did she believe would happen to her if she didn't do that? If she didn't say those words in the right tone of voice? So we have to paint that picture for the judge.
Yeah.
And we have to paint that picture for a custody evaluator, for a guardian ad litem, any professional who's involved. So that's why I say describe the behaviors, talk about context, talk about what you believed his intent was, and what you believed would happen to you if you didn't respond to that. Yeah. So I have more of that in my book. And I'm going to shift over here for a minute and share my screen so you can see that. And okay. Now I have to figure out what to do here.
Sorry, I was going to say something and somebody came in and I didn't want to stop the, hello. Oh, you started screen sharing. Great. I wanted to say what you were saying. I love that because I see the same thing. And in what I want to go back to what you said about they don't recognize it as being abusive. And so that'll happen sometimes. And so they'll say, we got into an argument. Well, that wasn't even really an argument. They were being, bullied. And so the fact that they try to describe it as an argument, a normal person, let's say the judge is a normal person with normal reactions, and he thinks argument, that's two people going back and forth.
Right.
And so I think it's really great that you're, differentiating that. Interruption, sorry.
It's okay.
Daughter had to come pick up some mail.
All right. So what I did after working with these cases for several years is I started pulling together this information in a book that really is a book and workbook combination for survivors. And what I show you in this book is not only what the motivations are for the abuser, but I also show the different types of coercive control and how those are used. And actually, I put everything that's non-physical up towards the front of the book and the physical at the last, because very often there's no physical.
Yes.
But we still have a picture that we need to paint. And in the book, there are checklists on each type of coercive control. So they kind of go along with the power and control wheel with some additions in there. And then I talk as well about how they use that in the courtroom. So how do they use it with their attorney? How do they use it with all those professionals that are assigned to the cases? And how do they use that with the judge? And then part of the process of recovery, which I'm very much into recovery. I believe everyone needs help with recovering from these kind of relationships, are some journaling starts. So to help survivors actually learn how to see what happened, decide what they want to do differently, and how they're going to respond differently to the abuser. And as you said, when they start responding differently to the abuser and the abuser is not getting what they want, a lot of times they just finally give up because they've realized they've lost control.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, we are building thrivers.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do at our ministry. We try to work on that recovery, and I do believe that journaling is very powerful. So I saw that, and you also have another book that is a journal actually for preteens and teens.
Right. I have a couple of books. From Darkness to Light, Your Inner Journey workbook is actually for adults to heal from child maltreatment and family violence. And again, this is a workbook. Gives you a lot of places to journal and to look at issues. So I explain the issue and then give you a chance to look at that and decide how you want to do your life differently, because that's what we have to do. We have to make those decisions. We're no longer giving that power to the abuser. Mm-hmm. And then Through a Child's Voice is a journaling book for children. It gives them a chance to talk about what's happened, gives them a chance to start their healing process. And I've actually had a mom come back and say, I shared this with my therapist to see if this would be okay for my child, and she encouraged me to use it for myself. Huh. So those books are all available through houseofpeacepubs.com and the products tab. And I would encourage anyone to look for those. The Eyes Wide Open book is actually available as a Kindle book as well as a print book.
So sorry.
Yeah, the other two books are print books. So.
Well, I was going to say, I was looking through the child's eyes, and I noticed that you actually give a lot of food for thought. Things like, who was the parent that was taking care of me, took me to doctor's appointments, did whatever before the separation versus, what's going on now, mm-hmm. Because basically those poor children are being used as pawns. And, it's so sad. It's so very difficult to deal with. Sometimes, all the time, it's never easy for sure.
Right.
All right. So we went off of full screen. Hold on just a sec. I have some questions unless, is there more that you want to say? But this has been very helpful, so far. And, I hope, I'm thinking you're going to come and speak at our spring retreat, right? We hope.
I am planning on that, yes.
Yes. So in May of 2018, we're going to have a conference called Free Indeed, and it'll be down at Fort Caswell in Oak Island, North Carolina. It's going to be the week, I didn't put the dates in front of me, so it'll be the week before Labor Day weekend. It actually will run into Labor Day weekend, but we'll go down on a Thursday. You got the dates?
Yeah, actually Memorial Day, not Labor Day.
That's what I meant. Yeah, I do that all the time. I do know the difference.
So May 24th, 25th, 26th.
Yeah, we'll go down on a Thursday. Thursday evening is when we'll start, and we'll leave on Sunday morning. We'll do a little goodbye service or something, and then we'll leave probably around noon on Sunday. And people are welcome to stay longer if they want to get into that Memorial Day traffic. But we'll be beating it by day either way. So, we'll be posting more about that. We actually have our fall conference coming up next weekend, October 12th and 13th. Oh, that'll be 2019, won't it? The Memorial Day. Yeah, 2019. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry. So 2019 will be the spring retreat, and we're going to actually have a payment plan. We haven't quite figured out the price yet, but it's going to be reasonable. And we're excited that you're going to be working on this particular issue. I love the idea of your court advocacy. You had talked about even taking some of our interns and helping them learn to do this. That's what I do as an advocate, helping women to just put it in better words so they're not so full of emotion. They're not hurting themselves. So it's great. We do a lot of the same things. I think instinctively after a while you learn.
Right.
what needs to happen. But I do have some questions because we actually have a group, an online private group for women who have been, we might have some men. I don't think we have any men in there, but mothers who have been alienated from their kids. So I asked if they had any questions for you a couple hours ago, and I got some. So we're ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What does a relationship look like now? How much do we pursue our adult children when they have sided with the abuser and the church who excommunicated me?
That's a really tough one, because every adult child has a different take and a different response. Some adult children want to know the truth, and some of them have been so indoctrinated and so brainwashed that they believe everything about their mother, even though it's not true, and they refuse to have any relationship with her. So my recommendation is reach out, offer a hand, and say, I'm here. I'm willing to answer questions, show you paperwork, because technically they're not supposed to be sharing court documents with minors, but once they've reached adulthood, there's no reason why a parent can't say, you can look at the record. If you want to, you can go to the courthouse, because as long as the record's not sealed, it's available to the public.
Yeah. That's good. And in this group, somebody had shared something from a young man. You need to scoot over out of that. There we go. You're striped. Striped now. Anyway, that he actually started. He's got his own Facebook page. He was alienated from his father for years, and by his mother. And he said the same thing as you, that as long as she continued to reach out. And he says, you just don't ever stop letting them know you love them, and it's just going to have to be in their timing, I'm afraid. So that's
right.
Good.
Yeah. And we have to remember that it's more likely that they're going to reach out after they turn 25 or older, because that's when the executive functioning of their brain is fully formed.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it's much harder for them.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember is sometimes it takes them having their own children and realizing the relationship with their own children before they start looking at maybe there were some differences. So it could be into their 30s or 40s before they reach out.
Yeah, and I've seen that. I have a lady that I've worked with for years, and I started working with her 10 years ago. She ended up separating, because the man actually abused one of the children. And social services came in and said, either you get separated or we're taking your children. She kept the children, did everything she could do to protect them. And within a few years, as they became teenagers, then whenever they would go over, he was poisoning their minds. And they got to the point that once they were able to make a decision, they were living with him. And so she was alienated from them. And it's the same thing. They're coming back one by one. Here 10 years later, and for most of them it is after, like, maybe they've had their own children. And so yeah, I see that happening. So are we ready for question number 2?
Go ahead.
How can a mother protect herself from false allegations if the evaluator is biased, father favorable, and so is the judge?
That's really tough, because we find that there's, again, judicial training and even evaluator training that has been perpetuated that says mothers make false allegations and fathers always tell the truth. And in fact, it's usually the opposite. And I discussed this once with a retired judge who's a friend of mine, and she said the thing that she's seen over and over in court, even in criminal cases, is that juries tend to believe men and not women, even when women are telling the truth. So it's very hard to sway someone. And that's why we need more and more training around coercive control and the dynamics of domestic violence, because what we have is we have professionals who are ignorant.
Yes.
It's not that they're stupid, they're ignorant. They haven't been trained. And I know you run into that with pastors and other people in the church system,
Mm-hmm.
that because they don't know what they don't know, they make poor decisions that actually harm children.
Yeah. Well, there's a good scripture for that. It's Hosea 4:6. People perish for a lack of knowledge. And it's so true.
Right.
So and she's asking, though, how could she protect herself from false allegations? So I would say maybe some documentation and, I mean, gosh, keeping good records, which should help as well, right?
Well, documentation is important, keeping a log, and I've been listening to some recent webinars on cyber stalking, because cyber stalking is on the increase. And one of the things that they recommend is that you keep a paper log of every communication, when it happened. So you have to do date, time, what was said,
Mm-hmm.
or a reference to an email or a reference to a text message, or even an instant message, any of those kinds of things. And then make sure that you have all of that printed out and prepared and provided to the evaluators. And this evaluation that I was just reviewing today, there were more than 1,800 pieces of paper that this evaluator had to look at, because mother just had everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she provided copies of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helped her.
Good.
Because then the evaluator was able to see exactly what he was saying and what she was saying.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And the gnat is back.
It's okay. You got gnats and stripes. We're good.
Right.
All right. So they're like, it's just a bad time of day. My lighting was really good and then it went bad. And anyway, I have another question. Number 3 is, how can you prove when it's done so subtly? And then he's passive aggressive. So everything is so subtle and hard to get to really pin him down on. And so that's why I got primary custody. It's all, it's like one of the ladies, I actually spoke to somebody this morning who's dealing with this. And she said, it's like he knows the line, like he just knows. I wonder, like, have you done this before? Because this is a fairly young couple with a young marriage. And it's like, he knows how to step right up to the line of, this would be really bad and it would look really bad in court, but he's just doing it so covertly. What do you do? Is there a way to kind of expose that?
Well, let's go back to what I said earlier about describing exactly what he's doing, what he's saying, how he's doing it, the context is, what she believes his intent is, and what she believes could happen to her as a result of this.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is very covert. Now, the other thing to know about narcissists, and a lot of these individuals have narcissistic personality traits or are narcissistic personality disordered, is that they have been working for years and studying people for years since they were children to understand what that line is and to know what to do to not cross that line.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just something that they've picked up since they married her.
Yeah.
They've been doing this for many, many years before that.
Yeah. All right. And the last question is, how can you combat the lies that your ex tells your children when you're trying to be the better person? So you basically, what they don't want to do is, well, your dad, how they're sitting there, that the abuser is putting them down and, belittling them to the children or making them look bad, and they don't want to be the same way. So how can you point out the truth without bashing your ex?
Okay. So part of that is mother needs to say, what do you know about me? And do you believe that that's true about me? So we'll go back to words and actions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you see me doing these things that your father is saying about me? Do you hear these words coming out of my mouth? And then really building protective factors and resilience factors with the children. So the children start to separate it out for themselves rather than trying to believe either mother or father. So teach them to be critical thinkers.
Yeah, that's good. And I think, you know, even in this, our emotions can hurt our relationship with our children as well.
Right.
Because I've seen, you know, if we allow ourselves to become bitter and angry, heck, when I was going through it, there were times when I really took things out on my children. You know, looking back on it, that was not the way to deal with it. And I know a lot of these ladies they're great moms, and they don't do as badly as I did. They might do a whole lot better job than I did at the time. But again, I think that the strong emotions kind of, it's very uncomfortable for children. So to be caught between two strongly emotional parents, I love that you're talking about, let's help teach them to reason and to, you know, to figure it out on their own without bashing the other parent.
Right.
Yeah. So anything else that you feel like you want to say that we haven't covered it yet today on this subject?
Well, there's a lot that we haven't covered.
Yeah.
And maybe we can come back and talk again and answer more questions. There's so many nuances to all of this process. And as you know, I'm here to provide advocacy as much as I can to women and to work jointly with you on cases if that's something that people want.
Yeah.
And we will just proceed forward. We have so much to build as far as building an advocate corps that is really trained to do this work. We're all kind of new at this and figuring it out as we go along. Yeah.
Well, and my hope and prayer is that, you know, the courts will get better at it, and that, I mean, you're just so, it's like every system and every place you turn they're basically, like you said before, they're just ignorant of domestic abuse. They don't understand the dynamics. And when you don't understand the dynamics, what you do is going to be harmful, whether you intend it to be harmful or not. Again, that's what our fall conference, Justice Delight, is about. We're going to talk about the legal barriers. We do have an attorney come in to speak, and we'll talk about, you know, even counselors, like you said, counselors don't have training. You would think that this would be a mental health issue and that counselors would be well-versed on domestic violence, but they're not. They want to, you know, they'll rush people into marital counseling, and we know that doesn't work in these cases. So there's just so many systems. Again, the church, for us in our ministry, we see churches don't get it. So I'm really grateful to have found you, Deborah. I'm just very grateful. You've got a lot of great information. I hope some of these ladies will take advantage and go to your website and learn some things, and then even, you know, plan to come to our spring conference, because I think you could really give a whole lot more information in, you know, 3 or 4 hours than you can in this one little hour that we've had spent here. But I really appreciate it. Lots of good information.
Well, Joy, it's an honor to be working with you and to come together and work to help women in these situations, because they need that. And just one other place they can go to, if they go to my website, houseofpeacepubs.com, there's a link to askdrdeborahw.com where they can ask me questions, and I will be happy to answer them via email. And
Right.
So we're all in this together. We're all working to change this system, and we just really need a lot more training to help people understand what they don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work together. Maybe we can do this again. If we get a lot more questions from folks, then we can certainly do another short one to answer some of those questions, because I didn't give them a whole lot of heads up. This is just 3 hours ago. And of course, you know, again, you'll be at our spring conference 2019. Can't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be at 2020 in no time. And so, again, we will definitely be working with you in the future, Lord willing. And then, so any last words before we sign off?
No, I really encourage women to come together and work on this together. And together we can reach that tipping point where we move the courts to look at this differently.
Yeah.
And we've made progress. We have a long way to go.
Yeah, we sure do. October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Speaking up is a great part of the solution. So
Right.
I'm always so grateful for when people, you know, do speak up, and I appreciate your voice on this. So I think that's it for our recording right now. Thanks everybody for joining us. And again, thank you for your information, Deborah. You guys know where to reach her, and you know where to reach us. Thank you.